Shalom. I'm going to be doing a teaching just revisiting the topic of the Rosh Kodesh. Rosh meaning head, Kodesh means new, or new moon, the head of the month. Understand that beginning of the month, and the month was defined from one new moon to one new moon. And to just look at a lot of these themes from different angles, and just with some new things that have happened recently, and some new information, and there's some good stuff out there on what is the new moon, how are we to understand it, and if we genuinely desire to walk in our Heavenly Father's ways, how can we respectfully honor His seasons, and this issue of sighting the moon, and let's say being one with Israel, or is it more important just the global consensus? These kind of things we want to talk a little bit on. Now, in terms of what the Kodesh is, I got this from a Jewish website. Many of you may know the Chabad website. And it's in here they give a good description of the current rabbinic calendar, where it comes from, but also just to understand that the original was on the appearance of the new moon, and an actual seeing and sighting of it. Just to read here, in ancient times, Rosh Kodesh, the head of the month, was declared by the Beit Din, that means the house of judgment, the Jewish court, only after two credible witnesses, so you get this idea of seeing, would testify that they had seen the new moon. And since the 4th century, however, it has been determined by a preset calendar. And this calendar is known as the Hillel II calendar, and it's the most popular, most widely used majority calendar, say, of biblical faith, that is seeking to keep the appointed times of Leviticus 23. But what we do see is it's preset and it's not the original. And I want to give a shout out to John Val of Elam Ministries. He's really high up on the Google search, because he's done a fantastic job with the document he did on just trying to show what was it like in Yeshua's day, in the 1st century, and he's got a whole lot of quotes where you can get a sense of that original new moon before the preset calendar. And so I have a quote here, which he got from the works of Philo, and it says, "At the time of the new moon, the sun begins to illuminate the moon with a light which is visible to the outward senses." So you're going to notice this emphasis on the outward senses, not just light shining on it, but visible to witnesses, to people seeing it. And then she displays her beauty to the beholders. Okay, so there's an understanding. Originally, tons of quotes from multiple different people trying to understand the 1st century. What did they understand of the new moon? And so we get the sense of it was when they observed, at least in the 1st century, when they observed the new moon. Now the rabbinic calendar, sadly, is it just does not put a high regard on the expected sighting. I mean, there's one thing calculating it, but you'll find, as with this year, when they are, an important month is the 7th month. That's when we're going to have Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, Yom HaKippurim, and Chag HaSukkot. We're going to have all these appointed times that are coming up in the 7th month, and when the Hillel II calendar is calling the new moon, it's 2 days before when people expect to see it. And so this is a frustration to a lot of people. It's a frustration to a lot of people in Israel, especially those who want to get back to an original calendar, and are just they just wonder why we're still going on with this, and we could have a house of judgment, and we could have witnesses come forward, and we could just do it as it originally was. Now, the reasons why the rabbinic calendar isn't good with the expected sighting is because it doesn't just try and calculate for it, it has other rules as well that it abides by, and this sets it off many times. For instance, some of the days of the month are just predefined as like 29 days, like for the month of Elul. They say every time it's going to be 29. And we just know historically that's just not true. That the months of the years, we're generally 29 or 30 days long. That was the understanding, that you can't just say this month is going to be this long. And this can cause problems. Another one is that within the rabbis' rulings, they've also said that Yom Kippur can never be on a Sabbath. It can be on a Sabbath, can never be the day before or the day after, and so the calendar shifts to accommodate this as well. And so often this, just the expected day of sighting, it's not bringing you to, as I said, sometimes it'll be 2 days beforehand, just so you understand the different calendars out there and why people are making changes and trying to go back to the original. So there's two really strong arguments, and these are good arguments in terms of the original desire of a Heavenly Father, that He gave us the moon, that the moon governs the month. So we have the word month is a moonth. In Afrikaans, they say maand. Again, maan is moon. So there's a cycle of the moon originally. And so the two different types that are spoken of a lot are, the one is the understanding of an astronomical new moon, that's what it's called by NASA today. And what's important with this is the idea of the conjunction. And the conjunction is when all the light has suddenly gone from the moon of the old month, let's say, and then from that point we get the next cycle of the months of the light slowly coming back over the moon. And so from that point of conjunction, they say that is the new moon. Whereas the other side is that of the sighted new moon, where the belief of many is that, well, no, it needed to be sighted. And that was the original plan, is that man was to just look into the skies, see it, and could be a witness of, I've seen the new moon. I've put there just at the bottom, there's a very good article, uses as much of NASA and other data. It's from Harvard, and it's really good with trying to get an ancient perspective of what in the mind of the ancients did they understand as Kodesh in different cultures. And so it focuses a lot on the Babylonian month, but what we do see is when the Jewish people went into exile, it seems as though there was a lot of compatibility between their months, that they could interchangeably use the words because they were being determined in a very similar way. So we can look at the ancient world, and so that this work here, it was done by a Jewish man, I think surnamed Stern. It's really well done. But you get a great sense of, in the ancient world, they really did favor this idea of sighting the moon. Even though we'll get into, it's not always straightforward. But they would attempt to. They definitely would attempt to have witnesses see the new moon and testify, and then they would declare in their nation, we have seen the new moon. So, and we see this within records of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. That's quite ancient. We're talking like 800 years BC. We see this within the Babylonian Empire. When we get to even with the Nabateans, who were most probably descendants of Abraham, and the Arabs, and just other related cultures as well. We see the strength of this idea of the sighting of the moon. That comes through quite a bit. But in terms of what was actually written by, particularly the records of the Neo-Assyrian and the Babylonian text, we get the sense of they were definitely citing it, because they would say things, and it was the new moon, and they would give the degree above the horizon. And anyone knows when you're talking about the degree above the horizon, this is because you're trying to cite it, and it's very important that it be above a certain degree. And so that comes through. You get the sense of, they would describe, we looked for it, but there were clouds, or it was raining, or whatever. There was something that prevented us from seeing. They would also, when they would describe their months, they would never say it was the new moon, as with the conjunction, you can predict really well, and they would have had the capability. They never said it was the new moon and then we saw it 2 days later. There's never a description of the sighting of the new moon as being on day 2 or day 3. That's not how it was phrased in their logs and in their testimony. The other thing is that in a lot of the people from the astronomical new moon conjunction side, what they often point to is that the mathematics to determine the conjunction was actually not too hard, and that's fair enough, and they most probably did have the ability to do that, but your average person certainly did not. And so we would see a sense of and it would clear up so many things. You wouldn't need the testimony of witnesses. You wouldn't need a whole lot of things. It would just be, you could plan the calendar till forever, and it would be just as simple as that. However, if that was the original system, you would, and they had the ability to work out conjunction, you would wonder why they would go to the need of having witnesses, putting yourself in this place where the clouds could get in the way of the first sighting, when you are fully aware mathematically that new light is already shining. So it does really seem that when you go through a lot of the literature in the ancient world, it really was important for kings and different nations to really see it, that they would observe it. They certainly would, at first attempt, is we want to see it, and then if not seen, problems would arise, but they'd have a way in which they dealt with it, and we'll look at that. So in terms of predicting and these kind of things, we see that they would watch on the 29th day. This is a testimony of someone from Babylon, the description, or Assyria, I'm not sure. We watched on the 29th day. The clouds were dense. I mean, it's clearly, this is how they were looking for the beginning of the month. We did not see the moon, and this person's talking to the king. We watched on the 30th day. We saw the moon, but it was already very high, so the angle, it got to a point where they were convinced that the previous day had already been seen. And so this is where we get the idea of post-diction, where even after the fact, could they have called, if there wasn't sighting and whatever, but they knew because of the angle it should have been, and so anyway, then ends with this statement, the weather of the 29th has to do with it. What is it that the king, my lord, says? So in the ancient world, there really was within a kingdom this need to proclaim and take in witnesses and to make a decision on what's going to be the first day of the month. And we can see problems that arise from this, we see here within whether Assyria or Babylon. And often you're going to see that there's this 2-day issue of, because of the rotation of the moon being 29.5 days, that's whether it's the 29th or the 30th day, sometimes described as the 30th and the 31st day, but Anyway, that we see um, that they would resolve this. But the question is, with Israel, how did they resolve this? Again, thanks to John Vol, and there's lots of literature on this. So this is from the Encyclopedia Judaica. In terms of in Israel, once they returned back to the land, how were they doing it then? Determining the month. We have a description here. Originally, the new moon was not fixed by astronomical calculations, but it was solemnly proclaimed after witnesses had testified to the reappearance of the crescent of the moon. On the 30th of each month, the members of the High Court assembled in a courtyard in Jerusalem. Okay, so this was the new day would have started at sunset, and they'd be seeing, is this 30th day the first day of the new month, or let's see. And they assembled in this courtyard named Beit Yazek, where they waited to receive the testimony from two reliable witnesses. Of course, they themselves could have seen as a group in Jerusalem, but they allowed for the testimony of people, maybe even far away, that may have seen it. There was this is how they did it. They would wait and allow for testimony to come forward. They then sanctioned the new moon if there were two reliable witnesses. If the moon's crescent was not seen on the 30th day, no reports came up, no witnesses came up to Jerusalem, then the new moon was automatically celebrated on the 31st day. Okay, so here, unlike the description of Babylon or Assyria, is that they didn't look on the 31st day to see how high in the sky or whatever. It would just be expected on the 29th, 30th day. No witnesses came, and they would declare it. So they used prediction. This comes through the literature, that they would predict a certain day, or day 29 is when you predict the chance of the moon being seen again, and we see this kind of order being set up of trying to they needed a judiciary to hear the witnesses and to make an official proclamation as kings for the nation. That other little towns couldn't just get theirs and they say, well, we spotted it, and these people over there say, well, we spotted it, and they're not telling Jerusalem, and everyone's like doing that. The nation needed to be on one calendar, and they give a day for the witnesses to arrive, and if not, they just make this call. If people came late, I really believe they would have just said, well, if our Heavenly Father wanted us to make this call, He would have helped you get here within time, as much as if He wanted us to see it on this day, He could have opened up the clouds and we would have seen it. So they would have moved forward, and that just seems to be what's testified to in terms of how it happened in Israel. And the importance of this, originally the sanctioning of eyewitnesses, it made the official declaring of the new moon an official event. And we're going to see this issue of kings and government, as we've already seen the baked in, and a quote where we say, what do you say, my king? Because you have festivals, holidays, high Sabbaths, personal appointments require that the nation would understand the sanctioning of the moon according to the official decree. This would be an important part of running a kingdom, is getting at least getting the whole nation on board with, this is the decree of the month, the first day of the month. All right. Now we need to also understand, this is going to become important with the idea of day 29 or day 30, and this idea of they would wait, it would take a while where they would have to wait for witnesses to come forward. Because maybe they didn't see around Jerusalem, but maybe people a day's journey away, maybe they saw, and they had a responsibility to get up there and declare, hold on. So there was this understanding of this was more than Jerusalem, and it was a land thing. Has it been seen in the land of Israel, and can we get the testimony on that 30th day or not. And so here's a description from the Mishnah. Josephus, he quotes the same one where, anyway, within Judaism they were saying, yes, you can pack your own food even if it's a Sabbath, and you can begin to walk, you can break the Sabbath, you can carry a stick and defend yourself, and it's going through all these things, and it even is talking about if you have to go for a day and a night, and give testimony, you need to go and do that. And I don't know how this would have practically worked. I would imagine maybe a few people would begin to set out, and they'd realize maybe there's enough witnesses, and some would go forward to carry on, and I'm not sure exactly, but anyway, we see that they would desire witnesses to come forward on that day. So anyway, we predict the sighting, the day of the Kodesh, and then if it isn't seen on that day for whatever reason, or the witness concerning seeing it does not come up within that day, for whatever reason, we say the next day will begin the new month. It just seems to be the ancient rule of how they did it. Now, this becomes quite interesting with regards to Saul in the book of Samuel as king of Israel. I don't know if you remember the story. He's getting to the point of he's wanting to execute David, and his jealousy is pretty insane. Anyway, David was too scared to be at what is called the new moon. And he's telling Jonathan, listen, tomorrow's the new moon, and I'm too scared, and he hides away. Anyway, but what's interesting about the description here is that a lot of people turn to it saying that his description of behold, tomorrow is the new moon is clear evidence of prediction, and they knew. Well, as we see, there is an element of prediction, of understanding, and this doesn't necessarily prove a conjunction idea as well as just the many generalizations where there can be an added context of it's the expected new moon. But what's fascinating about this passage is that you actually do see that it actually is a feast that lasts 2 days. You have the king there, and this makes sense in terms of witnesses maybe coming forward, and if they traveled a long way, that even if they knew they had declared the new month, if witnesses have traveled a day to get there and give it, you can understand that if for your service, stay on and have a banquet with us. And if you read the passage, you just get a sense of this was by default within the political structure a 2-day affair, and it begins to make sense in terms of seeing how the issues that went on with trying to declare the new moon. And anyway, so I'd encourage you to read that. Just also with tomorrow, a lot of these phrases we need to be just wary of and how people interpret it. Machar or mimocharat, it means the next day, and contextually it can mean in terms of a calendar day setting, or it can mean in terms of on the morrow, just to make that distinction. All right. Okay. The other thing I just want to get into is, and this has been a bit of a challenge this year, is that it's a wonderful thing that different nations are coming to an understanding of the original calendar, let's say, and there's this independence that I think our Heavenly Father doesn't mind, that the nations of the world can site where they are and maybe have their own Beit Dins and can officially say, we've had sightings, and we are therefore sightings or non-sightings, I suppose. We're declaring this day and the month going forward, and there's this independence, and that's quite. I think that's quite good on a secular level, but we do have a problem when it comes to the idea of on a religious level, on our spiritual calendar. because, and I don't know if this is right, but we have a sense of, for instance, in Christianity, the attempt is that for a specific day, all of the world will be, for that day, coming with whatever feasting they're doing on that day, and they'll be together from east to west. Same with Islam, same with most religions. They would want unity of a day and a worldwide idea as well. The problem with the independent sighting is with this issue that may arise. And we actually saw that this year, where usually, actually most people are in sync. When the world has seen the new moon, Israel's seen the new moon, and there's not much different. What happened this year is that a lot of people saw the new moon and Israel did not. And it was compounded with another issue. So it's not just it would change there being a worldwide day for the Moedim of that season. The way it worked out, and it was very unique, was that it actually pushed out the day of the first fruits and Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, a week out from everyone else. And this is something I've just been meditating on a bit in terms of this idea of independence of sighting, and also this desire that I have of the idea of a worldwide day. And I like to be doing the day with the people of the land who are genuinely trying to sight the moon and be in step with the ancient calendar of my forefathers. And being 7 days out is a real tough ask. And that happened this year. And this raises just issues about independence, and it just highlighted a little bit the idea of following Israel. And I suppose the question is Israel to be in line with the other nations' sightings, let's say, of the new moon? That they shall align themselves to the sighting of the new moon, or should the biblical nations be in line with Israel's sightings? And I personally prefer the latter. For a few reasons, because the natural inclination of the Jewish people themselves, and this with Karaites who want to sight the moon and be in step with Israel, they themselves very much, even if they are in America and let's say the new moon was sighted there and for some reason not sighted in Israel, their heart is to be in one with the people of the land, and they do not expect the people of the land to somehow shift towards them. And this idea of being in exile, and rather we need to look to those who He's restored and be in step with them, and to surrender, let's say, that liberty that you certainly could cite it, and you could say we see new moon here, but to surrender that to be in step. And I think, at least in my heart, that's what I'm feeling for the moment. It's not often that there's an issue here, but it happens now and then. And I do feel that when those situations arise, to be in step with Israel. Already in the southern hemisphere, we have an element of this surrendering. Okay, we don't go so far as to surrender our sunsets and sunrise or whatever, and neither does Jerusalem expect us to, everywhere in the world, keep a day exactly within what their sunsets are. But we do surrender. We don't in the southern hemisphere. We don't show an independence of of springtime. We keep spring feasts or spring days, appointed times in autumn, and we don't think about that. But the reason is, it's not because of Rome, it's not because of America, it is because of something in the northern hemisphere, and that is that really the calendar comes from, there's a recognition, and I think that's good. I certainly don't want to change and swap out by 6 months here, because I want to be in unison with the northern hemisphere. And if there is this principle of being in unison, and I could make the case for, hold on, we're having lambing season and we can see the buds are doing this, and this is definitely spring coming up, and according to the scriptures in the springtime we should be doing these things. And I could make that case, and it's even very visual. I could say, well, it's here, spring is here, I'm going to do the spring things. However, let's just say the authority of that which comes from the land, I believe, should have precedent. And so this is something I think we need to think about, especially this year with the 7-day issue that happened. It wasn't just one day, it ended up being a whole week. And that sucked, I'll be honest. It just did not feel nice being a week out from others. And anyway, so these are just some things to think about. Alright, so in revisiting this topic, I think we have really solid ground on the original. Even if the nations could predict conjunction in that, the ancient world would do this witnesses and sighting of the moon, and kings would have to get involved and listen to the witness accounts and to determine for their kingdom when the month was. And I think there's a lot of evidence for that is how it happened. And this often led to like a kind of 2 days grey area where we'll see what happens. And so it's very similar to today, with those who try to go back to what was the original. And so I just think in a respectful way we should really seek to go back to what was the original, especially in the light of some of the traditions are really not trying to even get it right, and trying to, even if you're going to predict or advance beforehand, there's other rules that are just messing it up. So I think it's good. I want to encourage those who are traditionally looking to be in step with the sighted moon to continue doing that. Pray over the issues that have come up this year, and a bit of meditation there on issues of submission and laying things down, or maybe it shouldn't be that way, however, but we need to talk about these things. And so as the 7th month is approaching, and different people will be on the different calendars, I thought it would be good, especially with Yom Teruah coming up, and just exploring again why these Karaite ideas many of us hold to, with the idea of witnesses, sighting, not with just natural observance, not with telescopes and that, but a very real agrarian, looking to the skies, looking for the light of heaven, saying it's time to go, and where this comes from, and to be confident in moving forward in this way. And so I'm going to leave that there. Hope for some, maybe you learned a lot. Hope it wasn't too much detail, but just so we understand where we're coming from. Alright, okay, shalom.